Hey guys, I'm the 50s Kid. We're continuing on with the M54 engine rebuild project. This is part 2 of the blueprinting series. And in all honesty, it's not real blueprinting. I mean, blueprinting is usually like a term that you use if you're building a race engine and stuff. You're getting everything absolutely perfect. I'm not doing that, but this is basically inspection of all of the internal parts of the engine. We're figuring out which parts need to be remachined, which parts can just go straight back into reuse, which parts need to be replaced, and so on. In the previous video, we looked at the engine block. We looked at the bores. We figured out if we can just deglaze hone them or if we needed to get them remachined. We looked at the pistons to see if they could be reused. Turns out they couldn't. I'm going to need to use oversized pistons. I'm going to need to rebore the cylinders to make them fit those new pistons. So we looked at all of that. We looked, obviously we're going to need new rings to fit those new pistons. But now what do we have left? We have the bearings left and we have the crankshaft left, as well as the connecting rods. So let's get started. So we're going to start by examining the main bearings. This is main bearing number 1, closest to the front of the engine. Number 7, closest to the rear. These are the lower bearings. As the engine sits upright in the car, these bearings are on the bottom. These ones are on the top. So number 1, this is basically where the little tangs are. This is the exhaust side of the engine. So basically the tangs always match up. So I've split them open like this and unfolded them. That way you can tell, when you look and you see this sort of shiny wear on a side, if you were to see, if I were to flip the bearing the wrong way, it would actually look like tapered wear had occurred, as if the crankshaft had been bent, but that is not the case. You got to keep your bearings oriented correctly and realize that this is the front of that same bearing. When they were together, they were like that. So important to keep your orientation correct. Now, one thing you want to look for overall when you line up your bearings like this is you want to look for more wear in the center bearings, particularly the most center bearing. More wear there than the others. If you see heavy wear along the center, that's evidence of a bent crankshaft. But I'm not seeing that here, so that is very good. This wear here, the shiny wear, normally on a normal kind of bearing, a shiny wear would actually indicate oil starvation. However, these are actually aluminum bearings, and this shiny area is just the normal wear pattern for them. So I'm not too worried about oil starvation issues. The only thing I'm really worried about are 2 things. Number 1, you can see that there's a little line right here, and I can actually feel that groove with my fingernail. So obviously foreign material got in there and caused that groove. And there's another little one right here that I can barely feel with my fingernail. And I'm just worried that that foreign material might have also damaged the crankshaft's journals. So I'm definitely going to inspect those pretty closely. The only thing, the top bearings are actually particularly, the top bearings are better than the bottom bearings because the bottom bearings take the major thrust load. The only thing I'm really worried about is this bearing on the end here. That's just kind of an unusual wear pattern that I'm seeing there. It's way heavier than all the rest, obviously. But at this point, I'm thinking and I'm hoping that that was probably caused by the damage that I had to my transmission when the oil pump bearing spun out on my transmission a couple months ago. I guess that was earlier this year, so I guess that was a year ago. What would have happened is the torque converter, you see the end of the torque converter bolts here, and the other end of the torque converter is sticking into the transmission here, and it's riding in that bearing. So once that bearing spun out, the torque converter might have been able to oscillate this way, and that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking maybe it was oscillating and gravity was pulling it down, and that's what caused this wear pattern here. So that is my theory about that. I have no idea if it's correct or not. The next step from here is going to be to examine the crankshaft and see if this wear pattern has caused any kind of tapered wear on the crankshaft or anything like that. But we will do that in the next step. So before we go there, we're going to take a look at the connecting rod bearings next. So these are the connecting rod bearings, again, number 1 through number 6. These are the cap bearings. So again, up in the car, these would be on the bottom. These would be the lower half of the cap right here. And these would be the uppers. And I've labeled each one. Very important to label each one, by the way. So those would be the uppers. Now, when it comes to connecting rod bearings, the uppers are the major thrust surface, so you should expect to see greater wear on those, which you'll notice I don't really have greater wear on those overall. In fact, you know, on this one, for example, the wear is greater on the bottom one. So that kind of doesn't translate to my particular set of bearings here. Again, I've kept them in orientation the same way, which in this particular case is extremely important because, as you can see, the biggest problem that we're seeing here is the tapered wear across all of these bearings. You can see they all have tapered wear. It's tapered this way, except this one. This one doesn't really have it. It's showing sort of a different kind of wear over there, but this one, even though it looks like it's even up here, you can still see there's taperedness on that bearing as well. And we also see the taper on the upper bearings as well, and you'll notice, because I've kept them in orientation, the taper is going the opposite way. So whereas it's tapering out this way on that bearing, it's tapering out this way on that bearing. So when this bearing was like that, you can see that that's the wear there, but then, you know, it was just the opposite on here. Now, what this means is that very likely this connecting rod got bent this way. Is that the right way? Actually, no, it would be this way, because that bottom bearing, you see that bottom bearing would be pressing up against the crankshaft here. And then that top bearing, you see the wear pattern is on this edge. So that top bearing would be pressing down on the crankshaft this way. So this is a very exaggerated version of what happened, but this connecting rod, and I think all of these connecting rods, probably got bent this way somehow. So that is the situation that these bearings are telling us. And you'll notice that I've marked the connecting rods. They've got these little marks here, and I made that just with an auto centering punch right here. You just kind of hold it down, press it down, and it punches down. You know, it releases a spring and it makes a little punch mark. It's for when you're like drilling in metal, you can make a little, you know, a little dot, and that way your drill bit won't rock, or won't walk, I should say. So you can use one of these to mark it. There's probably going to be debate on that. I think I did, you know, after I did this, I finally found a paragraph in my engine rebuilding book that said beginning machinists do this without realizing that it could cause stress risers in the connecting rod. I don't know if that was just, you know, powdered metal rods only or what, but I have seen this done in many other places, so I don't know. It's up to you whether you should do it or not. You know, you can always just use a Sharpie to do it, and then, you know, when they get clean, somebody can just, you know, re-Sharpie the number on them if you just don't want to mix them up. By the way, guys, in case I didn't mention it, all these bearings are getting replaced. If you see any like shiny areas on an aluminum bearing, or if you see, you know, this sort of any kind of wear pattern like this on a connecting rod bearing, which is just I think it's a tri-layer bearing on these, time to replace them. Bearings are your wear item. Bearings are what get replaced. We need to get the connecting rod off of the piston. Luckily, these are not pressed in. They're free-floating piston pins or wrist pins. There's just a little sort of circlip in here that you need to get out. So you can just sort of pry that sucker out. And you should be able to press it out, but of course, like, the built-up varnish is going to give you issues, might give you issues, so you can just knock it out with, you know, a little hammer if you need to. So here we go. We need to figure out if it's bent or not. In machine shops, they have a really fancy kind of jig thing where, you know, it's like a a machine surface here, and then it's like a vertical machine surface held at a perfect 90-degree angle, and they have a little thing that, you know, they've got a little thing, they put the wrist pin into the connecting rod right here. They got a little thing that sits on top of it, and then, you know, it's supposed to touch the machine surface, and then you can slip a feeler gauge in there and see if it's bent or not, or twisted and whatnot. Pretty clever kind of thing they have. We don't have that here at home, but you know what? You really don't need it. There's just kind of a more obvious way to check these. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take off the cap just in case. We're just going to take that off. So we're just going to measure this part, and we need to have a machined surface to measure this against. And when I say machined surface, I mean a metal, like a cast iron machined surface, such as like the table of my my table saw, the surface of my table saw, or I could have used my jointer as well if it wasn't packed away, but you're going to need a machined surface. So let's go use my table saw and see what we see on this connecting rod. Okay guys, so this is a little interesting. I always go through all these things when I'm doing these videos just to make sure that I know the direction I'm going in for the entire video. So obviously I've checked all of this before, a couple weeks ago actually. And when I checked this connecting rod on my table saw here, I noticed that there was a rocking in it, which you can sort of hear. And if I press down on this end, you can see that I can get the, it's a 1.6 thousandths feeler gauge in there on the bottom like that. And if you turn it over, can't really get it in. But I'm realizing that when I move it up here, I don't get the same effect. And there's no rocking sensation over here. And when I just checked this now, this is what I saw. And I figured it must have been because it's so cold here in my workshop. I'm doing this, shooting this at night right now, and it's winter time. So I figured, you know, the temperature change was affecting the metal somehow. You know, metal expands when it gets bigger, just like everything. And so what I did was I soaked this connecting rod in just a little thing of hot water just now for a couple minutes and heated it up, and then checked it again, and I found the exact same result you just saw. At this point, this thing is just, you know, sort of room temperature, not room temperature for the garage, but just room temperature for inside your house. So what I'm seeing now is that it was my table, my machined surface that I guess droops down over here at the end, and I just didn't think to check it with my straight edge, which must be what happened. And this is kind of embarrassing for me because just based on this is number one connecting rod. Just based on this, I didn't check the rest of them. I saw that. I saw the wear on the bearings, and I assumed that was it. They were just slightly bent, and I needed to get new ones. So I went to a junkyard. I pulled an engine from a car, pulled it apart, and pulled those connecting rods and bought them for about 80 bucks. And now I guess it appears I really don't need them, which is kind of upsetting, but not that upsetting. Let me go ahead and show you what the number one connecting rod looks like on the engine that I did, on the ones that I did buy, just for comparison, because it's actually kind of interesting. Okay, so here is number one connecting rod and piston from the used engine that I purchased. And the most interesting thing to me about this is the bearing wear. Take a look at this bearing wear. You can see that on the bottom cap, we've got tapered wear right there. But on the top cap, the wear is completely even. So that's, again, really, really interesting. This came out of a 528, I believe. Same pistons, by the way. 528, 328, same pistons, or same connecting rods, I should say, as the 330. Different piston, same connecting rod. But that was the wear pattern. And what I did in the junkyard was I took these connecting rods and I put them, the only machine surface I actually had was the engine that was flipped upside down. So I just put it on the edge of the engine where the oil pan gasket goes. Let me show you that. So I did this in the junkyard. I just sort of put it on this machine surface and tried rocking it, and you know, didn't see any rocking out of these. So I assumed these were good, and I bought them for that reason, because specifically because the upper bearing had completely normal wear, and this is the thrust surface. So yeah, I guess at this point I might not be using these based on what I'm finding. I'm going to go ahead and check every single one of my original connecting rods and just make sure that I'm not getting any rocking out of those. And then I'm gonna, what I probably should do is put my straight edge on my table saw there and figure out if we've got any taper on that surface at all. So let's do that. By the way, quick look at these pistons that came out of the 528. Hopefully you can see right here, there are lots of vertical scratches along the tips of the pistons, and it's like that on all of them. These pistons are in much worse shape than mine were. So yeah, quite interesting. Of course, if you have any vertical scratches like that on your piston, junk it. It's junk, you need new pistons. You know guys, I could swear I remember checking this surface with this level, with this straight edge, to make sure that I didn't have any, you know, to make sure that I did have a straight surface. I mean, look at that. Hold on, let's do that this way. You see, this feeler gauge is not going through. It's going through there. So, if anything, we've got a little dish in this area right here, all the way to here. Yeah, that's right. That's what I remember from last time. This is actually ringing a bell. And then it gets through back here in some areas, but then it doesn't want to get through up here. So it's as if, and see now, that's interesting, because you can't really tell based on that if, well, I guess you can. I mean, if we're comparing outside edge to outside edge, over here we've got this, we've clearly got a pretty flat surface all the way to there. So if I'm just checking the connecting rod here, I can't get the feeler gauge through. And that's what okay, so that's, I'm remembering that. Let's assume that this is the flat surface, because what we just saw, you know, that's the flat surface right there. So yeah, see, that's what I was doing. There, you can, okay, you just saw right there, using my flat edge, using a feeler gauge, that this area right here is definitely flat. I couldn't get a 1.6 thousandths feeler gauge in there. But so now if we put the connecting rod there, you can clearly hear the tapping. It's very, very slightly bent that way. So if I just hit it here, I mean, I can start to get the, I can get the 1.6 thousandths in. Just barely though. I mean, it's a very, very, very small amount. Mostly on the edge over here. Let's try to move it here. Yeah, I mean, now you can get it in. Now I can get it in right there. Not so much there, so it seems like it's actually twisted slightly that way, maybe. This is what I remember seeing. Okay, so now, okay, I'm not crazy. And yeah, if I press here, I could feel that this is lifted. Look at that. I'm getting the feeler gauge completely under it. Okay, so I feel a lot better now, because I was really embarrassed a second ago. I'm like, damn, I know I did this. I know I remember doing this. I'm not crazy. So yeah, there we go. There's definitely a bend in this connecting rod, okay? So now that we know that, let's check out the new one that I bought, or the new used one. I almost feel like putting this in the water too, because that water actually cleaned off, you know, it cleaned off the surface varnish, did a pretty good job. I'd have to heat the water back up, but let's go here. See, nothing there. Nothing there. So, okay, right there. Physical evidence. We have it on camera that This connecting rod is absolutely better than this one. This one has a very small bend in it. Very, very small, but big enough to actually cause tapered wear on its bearings. So cool. I did not waste money. I'm very happy, and you guys saw it. Proof positive. This is number 2 of my old connecting rods, ones that came out of my engine. There wasn't actually tapered wear on these bearings on number 2, if you recall from that scene a couple seconds ago or minutes ago, whenever it was in the video. This one didn't really have that kind of wear. So I'm not surprised that it's not exactly bent. See, it's fine. This one seems to be fine. Maybe there's a very, very, very small amount there. Yeah, you can get that feeler gauge in right there. Very small amount. Here's number 3, old bearing, old connecting rod that came out of the engine. Let's figure out which side is which. The numbers that are stamped in to the connecting rod, that's the exhaust side. And I do believe that that the taper was coming this way. So we should find that it's that way, which we do. So if I'm putting my exhaust side here, which is the numbers that are stamped in, not the numbers that I stamped in, not the little 3 dots, that's the intake side because there was nothing there. On this side, there are numbers that are stamped into each connecting rod, and there are matching numbers on the cap. That's the exhaust side. So if I'm putting that side here, that's the side that's going to rock like that. And I am consistently finding that it's towards this side, which is, you know what I'm going to say, interesting. Let's get the other 3. Okay. This is number 4, and we expect it to be on this side. There we go. And if you were to check it on that side, so there we go. We can clearly see that one is bent as well. Number 5. Same thing, not as, yeah, as much. As much there. Number 6. That one's not as much. That one I can feel more drag right here. But yeah, once I get in, then that's it. So it's a very, very, very small amount. Very slightly bent. I don't know. I'm absolutely certain that they can correct this at the machine shop. The reason that I chose not to do that is because it was probably going to cost too much. I didn't spec it out, but the cost on buying those used connecting rods from the junkyard was it was like $14 each. It was just the connecting rod and piston together. So I figured that they were probably going to charge me more than that at the machine shop, and even then I didn't know if that would weaken the rod at all. The procedure they would use to bend it back is they're going to put the wrist pin back in, and they're going to clamp it in a vise, and they're literally going to put like just a hardened rod, a really long hardened rod, and just use leverage to bend the thing up like past the middle point, and then it'll like spring back to the center. And then they would use that fixture that I was talking about to measure it and make sure that it's perfectly straight again. So I didn't want to opt for that because it was particularly easy or cheaper to get a used set of connecting rods. So that's what I opted to do. I did check each one of the new connecting rods in the junkyard using that method I showed you. I used the machine surface of the engine, but I suppose we should go ahead and check every single one on here just to be absolutely certain, even though I did check all the bearings, and most of those bearings, the used bearings, they all look the same, where the cap bearing had that tapered wear on it, but the top bearing did not, which again, I find really, really strange. I do not have an explanation for that at all. I will freely admit I don't know enough to know what the explanation is for that. Something to do with like the twisting forces inside the engine. I have no idea. But I will check each and every one of them on this surface here and make sure that they are good before I put them into service. Okay, I have checked all of my new connecting rods and they are all good. So cool, that problem is solved. Basically everything up here is just junk because I'm getting new pistons. They come with new wrist pins, new clips, new piston rings, and here are the new connecting rods. So literally all that's junk, but of course I will never throw it out. I'll stick it in a box somewhere because I'm that kind of pack rat. I just want to mention something. When if you're reusing your pistons and you go to clean them out and like dunk them in chem dip or solvent, you need to take them completely apart because you can see this little varnish area right here. This is the part that's actually exposed when it's in there. And if you don't take them apart when you clean it, some of this varnish could actually flake off and then get in between the bearing or the wrist pin and the bearing surface inside the piston, or the bushing inside of the connecting rod, and that could actually cause it to jam up. So you definitely need to disassemble everything before you dunk it in solvent to clean it. So let's move on to checking the crankshaft next. Make sure that none of our bent connecting rods actually wore a taper in the connecting rod journals on the crankshaft itself. Hopefully all of the damage was contained to the bearing. I think that it might be. And we want to scrutinize the number 7 journal and make sure that this particular wear right here didn't cause any kind of a tapered spot on the main bearing journal on the crankshaft. So let's take a look at that next. I'm actually reshooting this video because the first time I shot it was at night and everything was really cold to the touch, and it's wintertime right now. And the measurements I was getting were like smaller than when I first mic'd this crankshaft a week or two ago, when I first did all of this stuff just to see what was what. And I realized that that temperature difference actually changed things quite a bit. So I'm reshooting this. It's warmer now. It's during the day. This is a warm day. It's like 73 degrees outside, and I've actually had the crankshaft in my house, wrapped up in plastic, wrapped in a blanket, just making sure it's room temperature, because that's what you want to have it. You want to have it at room temperature. You don't want to have it like freezing cold to the touch or anything, because there was a significant difference. There was about 3/10,000ths worth of it was 3/10,000ths smaller on the crank pins, and I think 2/10,000ths smaller on the main bearing journals. So pretty significant. So we're just going to go ahead and reshoot this part here. Now I'm making sure that my my outside micrometer is zeroed with my standard, which is a good idea to do every time you do this, because again, temperature changes. You want to make sure that you know what your equipment is reading, and correct it if that's your choice, and or write down the error, and that way you can subtract the amount of error from your measurement. So in other words, if you were to put the standard in there and you were to measure that it was reading 1/10,000th instead of exactly at 0, then you need to subtract you need to subtract 1/10,000th from your measurement. In this case, I was, micing my standard, and then I just readjusted the micrometer to 0. And if you want to know more about this, just check out part 1 of this series if you haven't seen it, part 1 of the Blueprint series. Anyway, we're going to start with the connecting rod journals, or the crank pins as they're also called. What you want to do is you actually want to take 2 measurements. We're going to take a Y measurement, which is going to be like this. That's going to be our up and down measurement, is going to be our Y measurement. And like this is going to be our X measurement. And you do want to be aware of the holes down here for the oil passages. You don't want to mic directly over that, so you'll just tilt your mic so that you're just not directly on one of these crank pins, or these oil, I don't know what you call that. Is that an oil journal? Now I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to take measurements in the center at first. And, you know, we did see that tapered wear on the connecting rods, right? On the connecting rod bearings. So I'm actually afraid that that has actually caused more wear on the sides here and here. And I'm afraid that that's caused barrel-shaped wear on these connecting pins. So I'm going to check them in the center, and then I'm also going to check them on the outer edges. I'm going to check it on this edge, and I'm going to check it on that edge because, you know, again, if the connecting rod was going like this, then the top of the connecting rod bearing, the top connecting rod bearing was pressing down on here, but then the bottom connecting rod bearing was pressing up on here. So we would have seen wear, you know, even wear all the way around on this side, and then even wear all the way around on this side, because again, it's always rotating around. So I'm going to check in 3 places, but I'm only going to, you know, I'm only going to write down the center measurements on my board here. The way you do this is, you know, you just open your mic to wider than you know the measurement's going to be. That way you can sneak up on it. So you use the little ratcheting mechanism to apply the proper torque. Now, what you need to do is make sure that you can actually still move the mic across the journal. And I'll explain why in a second. Let me take this measurement. It's actually 1.7708. That's crank pin number 3. And that's the Y measurement that I'm taking. 08. What I want to point out here is, if you're not directly on the center, if you're not centered over the highest points, let's say I was over here off to the side, and I went and, you know, used the ratchet, and hold on, it's not going to work because it's going to slide off. But if I wasn't exactly centered, and if I was more towards one side, and I used the ratchet, I've now made it too small, and I'm now not going to be able to move the mic this way. And that's how you know that you're not exactly centered. Or that's how you know that you are centered, is when you get perfectly centered and you take a reading, you use the ratchet, you should be able to slide it both ways. That's how you know you're not too small. And then you can go ahead and take your measurements. So that is, that's the trick of it. And you just want to make sure, again, you're not on one of the oil holes. Right there. So here's our X measurement. And it's 1.7708, which is always nice to see that we've got a perfectly round crank pin, at least in the center. So now I'm going to actually check the sides to make sure that they're not smaller. And I want to make sure that I don't come too far to the side, because there's actually a little radius right here in the corner. It's called the fillet. And, you know, there's one on this side and one on that side. So you want to make sure you're not actually touching there. So you just want to make sure that you're right on the edge of the shiny part, which you can, you know, clearly see. So let me make sure I get in the right spot here. .7708. So that's good. No barrel-shaped wear on that side. Let's double check this side. .7708. And just to cut to the end, when I did this last night, there was no tapered wear on any of the journals at all. So I'm not going to bother to recheck them again this time, because I know it's going to be exactly the same. So yeah, no tapered wear, even though those bearings were tapered. It looks like the bearings took all the damage and didn't actually cause damage to the connecting rod journals, the crank pins. So really happy about that. I'm going to go ahead and mic up all the rest of the journals, write the numbers down on the board, and we'll see where we are. And I just want to mention one other thing, that when I take the measurements of each one of the crank pins, I'm just turning them so that they're vertical like this, just to keep some consistency for me, or just to make it easier, I guess. There is no, you know, top and bottom to a crankshaft. And I hope it goes without saying that you should wipe off these connecting journals with a lint-free cloth before you start this, because a little speck of dust will actually alter your measurement. So these were the results that we got for the crank pins. Pretty consistent with my first results. as far as I believe it was 2 and 4 that are showing just a very, very slight a bit of out of round. You can see it's just, there's a difference of 1/10,000th between the X and Y measurements, which honestly, you don't need to worry about at all, or I'm not worrying about at all. Anything that's less than 5/10,000ths is totally fine. Again, I've already mic'd these journals. I already know that there are no taper on any of these journals at all. But again, I just want to show you what they measure. So you get it in, get it right in the center. Make sure that you can move it. I try to move the bottom and make sure that that's still movable so you can still sort of rock it. Take that out, take a look, take your measurement. This is 2.3613. 2.3613, and this is journal number 2, and that was the Y measurement. Don't be afraid to take multiple measurements if you're not sure, if you're not getting consistent readings. Just don't be afraid to take multiple measurements, period, just to make sure that you're doing it right. Because this does take just a little bit of practice, but not that much practice. Once you do it a couple of times, you got it. Yeah, so 2.3613. So now let's take the X measurement, again making sure that you're nowhere near the oil hole, which I've already done. .3613. Always good when you see consistent measurements. Another way to do this, or you could also take measurements in 3 positions that are 120 degrees from each other. So you could measure an X, Y, and a Z if you wanted to. It would be an X right there, and then a Y, and then a Z or something like that to get a more accurate picture of your out of roundness. But I'm just choosing to do X and Y because I've found that this crankshaft is pretty consistently nearly perfect. Really happy with the state of this thing. I am not going to do anything to it. One thing that I think I forgot to mention at the very beginning of the video, but with these journals, the first test you want to do before you even mic it is you want to do the fingernail test. And you just want to see if you can feel with your fingernail any grooves or anything like that. Because if you can, then you want to have your crankshaft polished. But I have not felt that on any of these journals. They're all perfectly smooth. They're all really great. This crankshaft can definitely go right back into service. So I'm going to finish miking these up, and then we'll just analyze our numbers and see where we're at. So these are the numbers that I got, guys. And yeah, these are a couple of thousandths bigger than the ones I measured last night when everything was too cold. So these measurements are way more in line with what I was seeing when I first mic'd the crankshaft a week or 2 ago, before I dealt with the connecting rod problem and that whole thing and went to the junkyard and all that stuff. The clearances for the bearing journals on the different colored bearings, if you'll notice here, we're talking about standard bearings because the crankshaft has not been reground, and you'll see that the yellow bearings, which are supposed to be, what this crankshaft has, because again, this crankshaft has yellow marks on it. So you can see the yellow paint marks on the crankshaft. The odd thing is that these paint marks are sort of closer to the crank pins. But the crank pins, the connecting rod bearings, don't have different colors for them. There's only one color. I mean, there is no color. So this is the confusing part. Maybe this paint mark does not have to do with the size of these journals right here, the size that these journals are ground to. There are a couple more paint marks on the other pins, or near the other pins as well. So maybe it doesn't have to do with these particular paint marks, and I'm thinking instead it probably has to do with the paint marks on the sides of the bearings, which I'll show you in a second. But let me just show you the wear for the yellow ones. The yellow ones are supposed to be between 2.3616 and 1.8. The green ones are 1.3 and 1.5, and the white ones are 1.1 and 1.3. So you see that that the white bearings are actually going to be tighter than the green bearings, and the green bearings are going to be tighter than the yellow bearings. So as you see, our numbers are actually in line with the green numbers, 2.316 to 2.3613 to 2.3615. And it definitely looks like we are pretty much in the green area of the bearings. So these are the sides of our bearings, and I'm hoping that we can actually see the color here. There does seem to be a color mark on some of them, and maybe this one's easier to see. Let me pull this out and kind of get it in some light. You see that mark there? That looks green to me. There's no mark on the other side. It's very hard to tell because these are, you know, there's a lot of varnish on them, but I think I'm consistently seeing a green marking across all these bearings. So I think that means that these bearings are greens. And I think that means that I need to order, you know, new green bearings when I do order these bearings. I want to go ahead and confirm this. I want to see what the bearing clearance is on these bearings before I proceed any further. You see that the crankshaft bearing clearance radial is supposed to be between 8/10 thousandths and 2.3 thousandths. So I just want to verify that clearance on these old bearings before I proceed any further. So I've put number 4 bearing shells back in and put the cap on. Bolts, I'm going to torque it with the proper procedure, which is first 20 and then 70 degrees. So I've got my dial bore gauge zeroed out to 2.3613. Which was the largest measurement I got of the number 4 main bearing journal. If you don't know how to do this stuff with the dial bore gauge, just check out part 1 of this video. So I'm going to go ahead and take a measurement here. Hold on, let's get this. I'm going to take on both sides of the, because you see how there's this little oil channel right here. So there are 2 halves to each bearing. So I'm going to measure this half and then I'm going to measure that half just to make sure we've got some consistency. But so I'm going to do the front half first. Just get this in there. Rock this until we see it move. And you can see that we've got, well, it's less than 2 thousandths. It's 1.75 thousandths. Yeah, 1.75 thousandths. And let's go over here to the other side. Tricky. So yeah, again, 1.75 thousandths of clearance. So we had 1.75 thousandths of clearance, and you can see that the range is between 0.8 and 2.3. So that would seem to be in line with what we're seeing. It does appear that these are green bearings. So that sort of brings me to this, guys. This is a whole master rebuilding kit for this engine that I've already purchased because, again, I did all these measurements a week or 2 ago just to figure out where I was at and what I would need to do. And basically, it comes with the oversized pistons. These are 0.5 millimeters over, or 20 thousandths. So we've got brand new pistons with new piston pins and locks as well, all the way across the board. So these are oversized pistons, and hopefully you can see they've got the 20 on them to tell you that they're 20 thousandths over. Most oversized, or all oversized pistons, are going to be marked with their oversizes. This is a pretty great kit. It does come with new head bolts as well, which, you know, so I already purchased new head bolts before I even started the whole job, which I'm kind of bummed about, but, you know, whatever. We got new piston rings. I believe these are Grant piston rings. These ones, it has the old oil it has the M54 style oil rings, but I've gone ahead and purchased the 3-piece M52 TU style oil rings from a different seller on eBay. I purchased oversized ones. He was able to sell those to me. It was the same guy that I bought my old rings from, the rings that I thought I was going to be needing, the standard size rings from. He let me return them and get new ones. This kit also comes with new bearings as well. And I was speaking to the seller, and they had a bunch of different sizes of, they had a bunch of different oversizes of bearings, but they did not have the different colors with their particular bearings. So I'm kind of, I don't know what the clearances are going to be on these bearings, because if my crankshaft journals are ground for green bearings, and if these happen to be like yellow bearings, the clearance might be a little too great with these. So I think what I want to do is take these bearings and just measure them up and see and see what the clearances are right now. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. By the way, this set also does come with like every single gasket that you're going to need on the whole entire engine. You know, it's got the exhaust gasket with the shield on it. It's got another oil pan gasket, all of the front gaskets. It's even got, you know, the oil filter housing gasket. It's got the stuff if you want to rebuild your Vanos. It's got just every single thing, intake gaskets, all the exhaust gaskets. It has a new head gasket. It's just got everything, and it was $500. So, you know, the price was just right, honestly. The only other, there was like only one other seller. Well, this seller I could have just bought the pistons from, they, you know, for $300. And there was one other seller on eBay that had oversized pistons for $300 as well. I guess just a different brand. But this just seemed to be the best deal out of all of them. You know, new connecting rod bearings, and I think we've got new crankshaft seals as well. Yeah, new crank seals, both front and back. So, you know, you just couldn't beat this price, honestly. So I just went ahead and opted for this. So if these bearings turn out to be too big, it's not going to be too big of a deal. I'll just pick up some green bearings. I'm not too upset about it. I think I'm still coming out ahead because, you know, I just got so much with this whole deal. Okay, so I've got one of those new bearings in there, torqued down to spec. So we'll go ahead and take a measurement of that. Looks like we've got 0.03 of clearance this time, which is too much. So let me move over to this side. Yeah, again, 0.03. Well, that's like 2.5, which is not good to have such a difference there. Let's see if I was on it correctly. Yeah, okay, like 2.5, just a little over 2.5, or more like 3. Let's move over here, do it again. 2.5. Not happy with these bearings at all, so I'm definitely going to have to order some green bearings for this thing, just to make sure that everything's all right. Now, I know somebody's going to drop a comment and say that I could have accomplished the exact same thing with Plastigage. And yes, you're absolutely right, but this is faster, and I happen to have these tools, so I used this tool. I will show you Plastigage, maybe in the reassembly video, just to show you how to do that as well. Yes, Plastigage is absolutely cheaper, but I have these tools to make more accurate measurements, and without outside micrometers, you can't check your crankshaft journals for tapered wear. So, okay, so let's go back to the connecting rod journals. The original ground size of those was supposed to be 1.7717. You'll notice we are a full 1/1000th smaller on all of our connecting rod journals. So I want to go ahead and verify what the play was on the old bearing. The clearances are exactly the same between 0.8 thousandths and 2.2 thousandths. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use number 5 because it had sort of the least amount of wear. It didn't really have much tapered wear. And so I'm going to go ahead and measure the wear on number 5 and just measure number 5. and see where we're at with that, and then compare it to these new bearings that I got. So it looks like the range on my dial bore gauge is between 2 and 6 inches, and the rod journals are 1.7 inches. So I can't use my dial bore gauge to check the bearing clearances on those. I'm gonna have to use plastic gauge. So I've gone ahead and put the main bearings back in and the crank back in and reassembled them and retorqued everything. So now the crank's in there. I've got number 5 all the way out right here. And I'm gonna put number 5 piston in. And you know, it's actually a good idea, I'm thinking, to get some practice with doing this with the old pistons while just before you go ahead and do the reassembly, because you know, they say this is tricky, but I've already done it once and it's not as tricky as you think. So I've just got this, I've got my ring compressor on there, and I've got the skirts sticking out just a little bit, and I've got it just compressed until it won't go anymore. You got to make sure that you've got the little parts of the compressor lined up. You know, again, we're just practicing proper procedure. So the arrow right here points towards the front of the engine. I've got a little oil in the cylinder already just to lubricate things. I don't have any oil on the compressor or on the piston rings or anything like that. And I just want to I'm going to take my mallet, I'm going to tap down the compressor so that it's perfectly flush with the engine block. And then just holding that, I'm just going to use my fingers to press the piston in. It's just that easy. I think the spring pressure of the rings is going to hold that piston in, and I'm just going to come down here and guide the connecting rod right onto the crank pin, just like that. So we're using the green plastic gauge. That's what you use. It goes between 1,000ths and 3,000ths. So I'm going to cut a piece to fit in there, and it looks like just that size piece will do. Plastic gauge, it's just a little piece of plastic that gets crushed. So we'll just sort of open it up, and we got to get that little piece of green plastic out of there. So we'll just lay it on top here. My engine building book says that you can do a very light coat of oil on the bearing such that the plastic gauge won't stick to it and will stick to the crankshaft journal, the crank pin. So I think I'll follow that advice. Hopefully it's good advice. I mean, just very light. I'm putting it on and then kind of wiping it off of the cap as well. So let's make sure we got the right side. This is the exhaust side. So, is that right? Yeah, because my little marks are on there. So here's the side. Put that on. It's an initial torque of 5 Newton meters, which I believe the point of that is just to make sure that the cap is fully seated on, but I can see that it is. So I'll just give it a couple turns over here. There, that feels like 5. Then we'll do 20. And that's it. Then we just go ahead and disassemble. And it looks like it sort of stayed on there, but some of it came off on the bearing as well, so maybe I shouldn't have really wiped off the oil. But there's enough to see. So you just hold the scale to the plastic gauge and you see what lines up. You can clearly see that we're basically at 1/1000th of clearance, which is good. You know, if it was 3/1000ths, then the plastic gauge wouldn't have been squished as much as it is. So with these old bearings, we got 1/1000th of clearance, and that is within our spec. So we're all good there. So now what I want to do is put my new bearings, my new connecting rod bearings in there and see what the clearance is on those. Okay, I just plastic gauged the new bearings and it looks like they're about the same. It's kind of hard to tell because some of the plastic gauge came off on the bearing too. So, you know, if I'm measuring the bearing side, it looks like 1/1000th of clearance as well. So the bearings are good. Bearing clearances are going to be good. So I've got the block off the engine stand and resting on my workbenches here. And I'm using my straight edge to check and see if there's any warpage in this block this way or that way. I've got it aligned by eye as best I can. I'm going to use my thinnest feeler gauge, which is 1.6 thousandths. Try to slip that in. You can see it's not going there, or there, or there, or there. So there's no warpage in this block. These main bearing bores do not need to be align honed at the machine shop. So that is very good. You absolutely need to pull this engine off of the stand. If I did this with the engine on the stand, the block would actually flex down this way, especially an inline 6 block. Even cast iron blocks would flex. So you want to pull them off the stand and put them on a workbench whenever you do this. Ideally, you're supposed to have a round stock, like a round precision ground round bar that you would use to measure this with, but you can use a straight edge as long as you don't have it cocked to the side. You know, if I cock it to the side, I'd be able to get a feeler gauge through there. So you just want to make sure that you're, you know, absolutely as straight as possible, and you'll be able to do this test and do this check. I didn't think that these would be warped. You know, I think if we had saw warpage in the block, we would have seen excessive wear along the bearings when we were looking at them. We would have seen like a dish pattern in the bearings maybe. So I didn't think this would that this test would fail, but it's good to just check just in case. So one last thing, guys. I went ahead and I put the main cap back on without the bearings in this time, and I just used my calipers to measure what that opening was, and it was about 2.555 inches. And then I set my outside micrometer to that, and I kind of zeroed out my dial bore gauge roughly at that. And what I'm doing is I'm measuring, and I just want to see. I want to check for out of roundness, or I want to check for a difference between this side of the cap and the other side. So both sides of those oil holes. And the reason I want to do this is because when I mic'd that new bearing, we did see a difference between one side and the other. We saw that that new bearing was sort of tapered. The old bearing wasn't, but the new bearing was. And so I was thinking to myself, well, it might be that this main bearing cap, the actual surface of it has become tapered, and that old bearing sort of got ground straight by the crankshaft. So what I'm doing is I'm checking here, and I've got about 4 thousandths there, and I just want to see the difference. If I have 4 thousandths, which I do, so I've got 4 thousandths there. I'm going to turn it also and check at 45 degrees. So it looks like 4 thousandths, and yeah, that's actually 4 thousandths as well. We'll do the same thing, come back to the front half and check, and it's 4 there and 4 there as well. So okay, looks like that main bearing cap is fine. It's not tapered in any way. I just wanted to double check that based on what I was seeing. So yeah, I'm gonna call those new bearings crap and not use those, which, you know, I wasn't gonna anyway, because we got to order some green bearings. So just wanted to confirm that. What I'll do is I'll just double check and make sure that all the rest of the caps are straight and not tapered or out of round in any way, because if they are, then they do need to be corrected, and the thing would need to be a line board and all that. So that is it, guys. There is nothing left to check. There's nothing left to measure. I can take stuff to the machine shop at this point and let them do all the stuff that I can't. I want to talk really quickly though about engine balancing. You might think that, you know, I need to weigh my new pistons, balance them, and then take them to the machine shop so they can weigh everything and rebalance my crankshaft. Well, here's the thing. That's really only necessary when you're doing a V engine, a V6 or a V8. When it comes to inline fours, and especially with inline sixes, those crankshafts are usually balanced, are almost always balanced without bob weights. They don't need to take into account the changing weight of the piston and the rod assemblies whenever they do the crankshaft balancing. So I don't need to get my crankshaft balanced because it was already balanced by the factory. It probably wasn't balanced perfectly, if I'm being honest. You know, if I took it there, they could probably correct it, and I might take it with me, and just it depends on how much it is. You know, if it's 60 bucks, then, you know, I'll have them just, you know, make sure, double check the balance on it and make sure it's absolutely perfect, and they can probably pull out a gram or two here or there. But they, you know, they don't need to rebalance it because I'm changing my pistons or because the weights of my pistons will change. I have already checked them, by the way, and the new pistons are lighter than the old pistons, and the replacement rods that I got are lighter than the old bent rods. So that's quite interesting. But I'm going to do a separate video about balancing pistons and rods after this. But at this point, everything else you've seen over these last two blueprinting videos, it can all go to the machine shop. The head can go and the block can go. And yeah, I'm excited. So I'm going to get on that as soon as I can. If you want to keep up to date with this project, please follow me on Instagram and Facebook. And also, please be sure to subscribe and then hit the little bell next to the subscribe link and make sure that notifications are turned on. That way you can get notified whenever I post new videos. I'm the 50s Kid. Thanks a lot for watching.